A Jobless Reincarnation is the best anime of the year. Now, that's not exactly saying much coming from me because, in honesty, I'm more of a reader than a watcher anyway. But this season, I've given more anime a shot than probably any season in the last 2 or 3 years. And in all honesty, I haven't really completed an anime since Rent a Girlfriend, which I believe was late last year or early this year. But the reason I finished both shows was completely different. Rent a Girlfriend was within a 24-hour period. I don't think I took a break to even sleep. But with Jobless Reincarnation, it's something I've watched over a long period of time. Don't get me wrong, I've definitely had my binge sessions where I'm just watching 4 to 5 episodes in a row non-stop. But why I'm watching is completely different. Rent a Girlfriend was like a bunch of really good but really bad junk food that I just ate way too fast. While Jobless Reincarnation is like a very good food that I can eat consistently and not really get tired of it. And I definitely don't feel like shit after I watch it. But of course, outside the fact that it's, the best anime of the year, the first anime I've actually watched to completion in a very long time, there's also the fact that it's been the first Isekai I've finished in even longer. The last Isekai I actually finished 100% to completion was Grimgar Fantasy of Ash. Don't get me wrong, that show definitely has its very minor advantages, but I have no problem at all saying that Jobless Reincarnation is the best Isekai I've ever seen. In fact, in these more recent years where I'm trying to start more and more anime, of course I end up dropping most of them, especially when it comes to Isekai. Up until Jobless Reincarnation, I've dropped every single one of them. Shield Hero I completely dropped. There's a different one this year that I thought I'd be interested in because I liked Jobless Reincarnation, but that one didn't pan out. It had a very terrible and very long name, so I'm not even going to try and remember it, but it was an Isekai and it was from this season. But the point is, I haven't really liked an Isekai in the same way that I like Jobless Reincarnation. Especially after Shield Hero, I didn't like it so much to the point where I actually made a video talking about how bad world building is in Isekai specifically. Because here's the thing, Isekai is just a cool concept in general, but I feel like most Isekai really miss the point of what makes the concept so interesting. It's not these very generic and recycled characters that we see within every single show, especially when it comes to the protagonist. None of that stuff is actually what makes the concept of Isekai interesting at all. It is 100% the world. Now, of course, I imagine most people came up with stories like this whenever they were 15 or 16, especially if Sword Art Online came out around that same time whenever you were 15 or 16. But let's say you're playing Skyrim or some other fantasy game. I imagine a lot of people, most people maybe, have had the thought of how cool it would be to be transported into that world. Like I said, this is, a thought of like a 15 or a 16-year-old. But I'm pretty sure almost everybody has had it, and the reason people think this isn't because, oh, Lydia is such a cool character, or even thinking,
oh, it'd be really cool to be the Dragonborn, wouldn't it?
Even being the Dragonborn isn't half as interesting as just being thrown into that world. So that's why world building is such an essential part of Isekai, and for some reason most series talking about Isekai specifically, they either just kind of completely throw it out or spend the bare minimum amount of effort in crafting what's supposed to be this fantastical world. And that is the biggest problem with most Isekai that I've seen anyway. But of course, this isn't really a problem within Jobless Reincarnation. It starts off super small, and when I say super small, the main character doesn't really leave his house for the first half of the anime. And even after that, he travels to a single city where he's a teacher of a young girl. He's not put as the focal point of a huge war or anything like that with this personality-less antagonist or anything like that, which is the case for a lot of Isekai. Jobless Reincarnation does something super simple that in the long run helps it to be more complex. It builds a very strong foundation for when it actually tries to do more unique and I guess risky world building techniques in the future. And while I think the world building in Jobless Reincarnation is great, the main character on the other hand, he's more of a terribly great. He's super controversial for a very good reason or very good reasons. He can't really be said to be a good person. especially if you're looking at it from a more light novel perspective, talking specifically about the scene where he's watching the cameras. I'm not going to go into a lot more detail than that, but apparently in the light novel it's way worse than it was in the actual anime. So basically, we have a main character that's already lived a life of pretty much complete depravity. The dude is basically completely unredeemable, but he does get a second shot at life, and he still has those terrible personality traits that he had in his original life, but he also sees the opportunity in how he can completely change his life around this second time. And at some points that does definitely become very endearing. And of course I did say he's unredeemable because I do think in a lot of ways he kind of is. But I've really come around to his character in a sense that I just think he's really interesting and he undeniably has a lot of charisma. I'd be genuinely surprised if somebody watched the entire show and still hated him just as much at the end as they did at the beginning. He's just the type of character that ends up growing on you even if you don't want him to. And something that makes him even more interesting is the relationship he has with his dad. Because his dad is in a couple of ways similar to him, at least on the outside, because whatever mistakes he made in his previous life, Rudius doesn't really have the same problems going on in his current life. Before he was a complete loser, now he's kind of the complete opposite. He's super talented and just has all these other things going for him. And his dad, from what we've seen anyway, is kind of like this. He is super talented and he does have a lot of things in his life that are going really good, if not great. But he also has just one of those more terrible personalities where it does get in the way of all the great things that he's achieved. And to a lot of people, the dad is completely unredeemable as well. I wouldn't go that far because I think that with everything that his father has done, it's not even close to the thing Rudius did in his previous life. But, that's just a difference in opinion, I guess. Because despite me saying all that, he still did hit his kid, cheat on his wife. And then, of course, after he lost everything, he did start to blame his son in a way just because Rudius didn't hate his own existence for not saving everyone. So he's definitely not Father of the Year, but at the same time, I do think he is completely redeemable. But it's just really interesting that this dynamic exists between these characters that are, of course, father and son, but at the same time, Rudius is an Isekai protagonist, so in a way, he's kind of not his son, but at the same time, he is. It's just a super interesting dynamic. But something that is still super amazing, but at the same time not nearly as interesting to hear me talk about, is how beautiful the animation and art style is, so I won't really be spending too much time talking about it. All you really need to know is that the animation is amazing. The art style never feels lacking or anything like that. Of course, neither does the actual animation. In terms of just the production area, I feel like it's one of the better ones that I've seen in my entire time of watching TV shows, specifically when it comes to animated ones, whether that be Western style or anime. It's just going to be one of the best you've ever seen. At least that's how it was for me. But ending things off with a controversial opinion. Now, of course, I only say this is controversial because I've only seen people saying the opposite. But early on in the first season is better than any portion of the story afterwards. Specifically talking about whenever he was in his hometown and just even in his house. That portion of the story, every bit of storytelling there, I feel like was just better than everything that's happened since. It was whenever I was most invested into the story. It's whenever I found things the most interesting. Not saying that any single bit afterwards has been bad, because trust me, it has not. I would have never actually finished the show to begin with, let alone spend this long talking about it. But still, despite everything that has happened in season 2, I'm not completely caught up. I watched this show in dub just because I feel like the dub is genuinely really good. So I guess technically I am 1 or 2 episodes behind. But essentially everything in the first half of the first season is better than everything that came afterwards. That's my controversial opinion. If you found this at all entertaining or interesting, go ahead and tell me a controversial opinion you have in the comments below.